Well, yeah, nice one, Steve. I appreciate you coming on. I've had a bit of an issue last week, but it's all sorted now. Thankfully, down to me, my mistake. But yeah, I mean, basically, I wanted to get you on as a first guest, which is really exciting. I didn't even think you'd sort of reply, let alone agree to come on, which is really cool. So I do appreciate it. Um, and I want to talk about muscle growth today. I've had a few podcasts in the past just going through, I guess, the basics of muscle growth and fat loss and all the kind of the basics that us coaches go through with our clients. But I wanted to get someone on who is a lot more, what's the word? A lot more experienced in the field, who knows, I think, a lot more in depth about muscle growth than me. I mean, I know the basics, I know how it all happens, but I thought if I get you on, that'd be really cool to allow my followers to get a bit more of an insight into how to build muscle, the most effective ways, what isn't maybe as effective as some people think. So yeah, I do appreciate you coming on. So welcome to the Fisher Fitness Coaching Podcast. So first of all, Steve, do you want to sort of go through, I guess, a bit of an intro about how you started in the industry, how long you've been in it for, what made you become a coach?
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate being invited on. And I know I've been doing podcasts for a heck of a long time now. So I think we're on like over nearly 400 episodes with like
Wow.
expert interview type ones. And me and Pascal have done, like, I think, over 300 improvement season episodes now on the podcast. So yeah, it takes a bit of getting used to once you kind of start one. But then,
Yeah.
like, I remember I'd get so nervous before some of my kind of guests who I'd have on. I'd be like, the night before, I wouldn't even be able to sleep and stuff like this.
Really?
But
Okay.
now I'm a bit better. I still get nervous, but now I'm
Mm.
a bit better. So yeah, I appreciate being invited on. So yeah, I got into the industry. Really, it was with my first competition in natural bodybuilding in 2014. I was already I got into the gym when I was barely 16, because I knew 16 was the age that you were allowed to
Mm.
like use weights, and I was like,
Mm.
oh, I'm basically 16. I remember them asking me, so they let me use them. But obviously, when I started, I didn't have a clue. But at that time, that's when I kind of got bit by the bug, and I kind of had a vague idea of like, in Boots pharmacy, they'd sell these like protein shakes that were just like disgusting, and I'd like be having some of that in the bathroom, trying to sneak it away from my friends to try and get some extra gains and stuff, thinking I was cheating or something. And I didn't really learn much about it until actually at university, where again I was just continuing to train and eat and like do this thing, but I didn't really have an understanding of what actually led to muscle growth. I just thought like go in the gym, destroy myself, eat quote unquote clean food, and like surely I'll just get like Ronnie Coleman in a number of years. And that
I
just
wish.
didn't happen. Yeah, exactly. So when I was at university, I unfortunately, alongside doing kind of quote unquote bodybuilding, I guess at the time, I was also doing some running. I used to love running. And on one of those runs, I unfortunately got hit by a van and got
Oh
a head
shit.
injury, which, yeah, led me into
Wow.
hospital. I was in there for, I think, I don't even know at the time, but it was like a month or maybe even more than that. But I lost basically all my newbie gains that I'd made.
Oh no.
And I'd lost like a ton of weight, came out super, super skinny. And on the back of that, I kind of was like, man, like I've lost all my confidence in running. I was on fluid restrictions, which really made like lifestyle challenging in terms of like at university, going out partying, stuff
Mm.
like that. It was just off the table for me. And I didn't feel well either. Like the head injury led to some downstream effects for like hormone control, things like this. So
Mm.
I wasn't in the best place. So I kind of found solitude in the gym, but realized, man, I got to be able to do it better than I did before. I got to be
Mm.
able to build this muscle back, but also like surpass that. So I started doing like research, and I found at the time like the place to go was either magazines or there was like forums on the internet. So I found some forums on the internet. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was unfortunate, but it wasn't bodybuilding.com, which a lot of people land on. It was like some other obscure one that doesn't exist anymore. But I would ask people on there kind of what should I do. Some people would like give me advice and write programs, and that's where I learned about like actually eating in a surplus and like bulking. But it was like eat as much like quote unquote clean food as you can,
Mm.
and all your gain is like clean weight. You're just gaining muscle mass.
Lead
And I
muscle.
went through that. Yeah, exactly. I went through that, and I gained so much body fat at the same time. that was like the most unhappy I've been with my physique ever, actually. Even after hospital when I was super skinny, at least I was like lean. Whereas here I was like,
Mm.
I didn't have that much muscle mass still, but I was like a bit of a blob, for lack of a better term. And for me, that's like, I always struggle putting on weight. So it was like crazy to get to that point and still feel really dissatisfied. Then I went through like a diet phase. I think I did like a warrior diet or some keto based diet at the time. And I just like didn't really understand how things worked. I just knew programs. I just read like, oh, I follow this, I follow this. I just thought there was like a magic bullet somewhere. I didn't understand principles behind anything or the science behind why a certain diet might work, like the calorie deficit's driving results, not the lack of carbs. The lack of carbs might be doing something that I don't want it to be doing. Anyway, I did that and I kind of came out of it all in a better position than when I went into hospital. So I was leaner and bigger than I'd ever been, but still not impressive. And so I decided, like, right, you did a bit of research, you learned quite a lot, but keep learning, keep trying to discover. And so I came across like bodyrecomposition.com was something I came across, which is Lyle McDonald's website. And I read it back and forth, every article he put in there. And I was like, wow, there's like an actual science to this. Like if I can build my own program based off these principles, I can build my own diet using something like flexible dieting and knowing macros. And I was like, wow, this is like opening a whole new world. And it allowed it to become what was something that was very restrictive for me and became sort of an obsession of, oh, I must eat my meal plan. And I take my Tupperware to my cousin's house, even though they'd lay down like a load of food. And it started to become like, oh, actually, I can be flexible to enjoy this as part of my lifestyle. And bodybuilding now, rather than taking quite a lot away from my life, can just add lots to my life. And at that point, I was working in London in an office and was just like, man, now I've learned all of this and gone through all that hardship of like not knowing what to do, but I've really enjoyed learning it and I've really enjoyed the results I can now get. I want to help other people do this. So I decided to, on weekends, I was doing a PT course and I became, after like a number of months, qualified and decided, hey, I'm going all in onto one-on-one PT. I got a job at a local gym that I used to train at. And thankfully, I still lived at home, so I could take the risk of quitting that job and entering into kind of one-on-one personal training. And at the same time, I started my competition prep for 2014. This was, and I started getting very lean, leaner than I'd ever been, leaner than most people in that gym ever saw anyone get. And so I started to get lots of eyes on me, especially from like the younger kids around my age. And they're like, I don't want you as a one-on-one PT, but can you teach me about how you do this? And I was like, hey, maybe I can coach you via online. At the time, I actually had an online coach who was based over in the US. So I was like using some of the tools and skills that he was kind of using with me, and I was applying them to those guys and just started seeing great results with them. And I started really enjoying this online side, partly due with anyone who's gone through a diet, you know how antisocial you become and how low your energy levels get. And when you're going through your first contest prep, man, it hit me like a ton of bricks and I had just zero energy. So I didn't really want to be one-on-one PTing. I didn't have the energy for it. I'm also pretty introverted, so that makes that quite a challenge in terms of just the energy that people take from you. So I started just dedicating time to the online business and slowly but surely transitioned away from my one-on-one PT, which I maybe did full-time for maybe 6 months, not even that. In hindsight, sometimes I wish I started one-on-one PT when I wasn't dieting and just like had more energy. But at the same time, it's led me to where I am now. So I started transitioning out of it and started full-time into online coaching in about 2015. And ever since then, it's just been growing. I now have a team. I have a business partner with Pascal Floor. We have a team of coaches. And yeah, now I'm kind of working with people to take their own time, like first time to stage and bring their own like best package to stage, and people with better physiques than I have, which is awesome. Like to be able to work with clients who are just like out and out better bodybuilders than I am. And yeah, like I said, with the podcast that I now run, that launched about in 2015 as well. And that's grown to become something that's really, really cool, where I can call some of the people that I highly looked up to and respected, and I still do, like almost colleagues, almost. I still see them as like a level above me and experts, but I'm friends with many of them, and I can like to reach out to them and ask them a question or just ask how they're doing in life. So that's become really cool. So that's a large fast forward of how I got to Revive Stronger, which the name is driven from me coming from my all-time low with that accident and then building myself back up through principled training, nutrition, and learning that. And now kind of hopefully helping others revive stronger and get to their best physiques ever.
Yeah, nice. Oh, I love that. That's an awesome backstory. Like people like you mentioned, but people like Mike Israetel, right? I mean, the to be sort of working very closely to someone like that must be pretty cool. Because there's someone like
Yeah,
who I follow and I sort of watch all YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff, and also your YouTube videos, podcasts and stuff. It must be a pretty cool feeling knowing that you can talk to someone like that and you can bring them on a podcast and they're happily just chat to you like a friend, right?
those also bring the best episodes. I
Yeah,
find when it's someone who I'm not that familiar with, I'm not that confident with, but when it's like someone like Mike, he might even ask. I love it when the guest asks my opinion on something. I'm like, oh, I feel very honored. Like
thanks.
they want to know what I think about this. Like, cool. But
Stop
yeah,
it.
it's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy to think that. And someone else who you might know, Richie. Do you know Matt Ogus?
No, no.
No, anyway,
No.
he was one of the first YouTubers I came across who was like, he got
Okay.
me into bodybuilding basically. And now, like, I go back and forth on DMs with him. He's got like almost 500,000 followers on Instagram. And
Wow.
I'm just like, it's wild to be conversing with someone who I like so looked up to. And
Mm.
now he looks to me for like sometimes for questions and pieces of advice, which is like, and crazy humbling. So, yeah, it's been a journey, and I wouldn't change anything. Like people ask me, would you like wish you didn't get hit by the van or anything? I'm like, it's taken me to where I am now, and I couldn't change. Like I'm so happy in the position and honored to be in the position that I'm in. And it's crazy to also have seen the industry in its own right, like grow and develop. And now there's also tons of podcasts and
Mm.
there's tons of like online trainers. When I was getting into all of that, it really wasn't as big a scene as it is now. And I think that was probably fortunate in my position too. I was one of the probably earlier adopters.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. There is a lot of online coaches around nowadays. But that's it's one of those things. It's a very attractive career, isn't it? And if you and if you can sort of and if you can get the business to where you want it, it's a great place to be. So where's I guess the last question on Revive Stronger? What's your plan for Revive Stronger? Where do you see it in 5 years' time? I know it's a bit of a cliche question, but where do you want to take it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one I've been thinking about more since we've got in the years leading up to now. It's all just been about like building, 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 focusing with I was in the business, not like on the business. Whereas now it's like we've grown to a point where like it's not a challenge to have a full client roster. And like that was initially in the first years, it was like, let's get a good amount of clients. Let's like earn a decent wage. And like, it's like, I'm earning like a decent wage. I've got a good client roster. Like I have a good number of competitors, and I kind of have moved our niche a little bit towards like coaching coaches because that ends up being who we attract anyway, I realized.
Mm.
So kind of moving towards that. And so the kind of the business growth of like being a solidified online coach is there, and it has been for the last few years. So it's like, what's the next level? Is it just working with maybe higher caliber athletes? Don't know, demand is so high, you have a waiting list and you can charge more, and that's like your progression, which I don't know, it just that doesn't inspire me particularly. And then the other thought that's been coming in recently has been based off some of the podcasts I've seen. Just podcasts in general have grown massively. One that comes to mind is I've forgotten what it's called actually. Damn, Chris Williamson, I think, runs it. Anyway,
Okay.
he basically does in-person podcasts, high production quality, releases like 3 a week, and I'm just like, maybe there's a role like I could go further into podcasting. We release like one podcast, like expert interview a week, but maybe what if I up that to two? What then meant for like sponsorships of the podcast, potentially earning income via the podcast? Because really, the podcast has only ever been, well, initially it started as just wanting to share information, have like selfish opportunity to talk to experts, and now it's still that, but also it's become a way to advertise, obviously coaching and services too, so that people are aware of the brand. But if it got to a size that there are enough listeners, could there be a sponsor like, I don't know, Gymshark, who
Mm.
would give us a certain amount of money to have their name dropped within the episode, and then I could drop client numbers down, focus more on the podcast? Because yeah, when you're kind of in this game, especially in like the evidence-based niche that we're in, reading studies, trying to interpret them, building questions from that are like nuanced and well thought out, it takes time. Like I know I've got
Mm.
like 3 podcasts this week, and I'm like, man, there's 2 big like studies to read into here. There's a bunch of questions I have to really have a think about and stay on top of. So I would need to like chop down, I don't know, a good percentage of clients if that was the way. But yeah, that's my roundabout way of saying it. I don't know, but it is something that I've been thinking about what's next for Revive Stronger, because I kind of looked up to Team 3DMJ, Eric Helms and co, and kind of wanted to be the European version of 3DMJ. And I feel like we're never going to be the same as 3DMJ, of course, but we have a coaching team now, and it's pretty solidified in that respect. It's like, but yeah, what's next? They have like their I think they have their like members site, which we tried. They have their like coaching cues and coaching area, technique area on there as well. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Have to see.
Nice. Okay. Well, ambitious, obviously, and it's going very, very well. So that's it's good to see. So no, nice one. Keep up the good work. Yeah. Cool. So let's go into the whole muscle growth talk then, shall we? Obviously, like with muscle growth, like what you mentioned at the start, I was the same. And I think a lot of guys who start off in the gym think it's easy, right? You go in the gym, you lift a bit, you lift heavy weights, you take each working set to failure. You don't think about proximity to failure, RAR. You go in, you work your ass off, you think, I'm going to build muscle. You eat loads of food, protein. Okay. And this may have happened to you, but the more I understood and learned about muscle growth, the more I realized how complicated and how complex it is, right? If you really start to go into the nitty gritty and everything, it's unbelievably complex. But in principle, again, I guess it's fairly simple. So there's a few factors, isn't there? Sort of going into like how you build muscle. What do you think, in your words, is the most important factor for muscle growth? If I give you a few as a list. So something like mechanical tension or volume, is it protein, sleep? What do you think is the most important factor?
Yeah, it's really funny when I recently made a Facebook post saying bodybuilding is as simple as training as hard as possible for as long as possible. On paper, it sounds incredibly simple. Just train hard for as long as you can. But in practice, what goes into that, when you consider all the variables, there's a lot that goes into that, or potentially could go into that. And for some people who are probably on the end of the bell curve of like genetically blessed, yeah, they can just go in and train hard and try and beat their performance next week, and they'll just forever grow and feel great on that. Whereas for the vast majority of people who are more average or towards the kind of other end of the bell curve for genetics, it's not good enough to just try and go in there and train hard and harder. And it's like, when you can't train harder, what do you do? Because that's where a lot of us end up. I remember when I first was in the gym, I just had the same approach as you. I'd just be like, okay, next week, let's try and beat it. And then I'd regress. My performance would start going down every week. And then maybe I'd get injured. And I'd be like, fucking hell, what's like going wrong here? Hopefully I can swear on this podcast. I just realized I hadn't sworn until that point.
That's all good.
I'm not normally a large swearer anyway, like Dr. Mike, like you said. So
he's so funny. Anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So all the things you mentioned there, like mechanical tension, sleep, volume, they're all parts of the puzzle for hypertrophy. In terms of like layering, their importance becomes challenging. Like you have the traditional thought, at least in our space at the moment, and some of the listeners might know who like Mike Menser is. He was literally like low volume, high intensity, destroy the muscle. That's how you grow back. And that's how you grow your best. And then you have someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is much more about like the pump, the squeeze, higher volume training, like all of that. He'd have like hours long sessions, like even multiple sessions a day. So like right at the other end of the spectrum. And so like you might be sat there thinking, I mean, who's right? And they're both meeting principles for growth. Whether or not one's doing it more optimally than the other, that's something that can be debated and argued. But when I think about some of the main principles, and I mentioned principles when we were chatting before on purpose, because that's the way I like to view kind of muscle growth and the training and nutritional aspect, and obviously like a lifestyle aspect too, in terms of sleep. I like to think for training, the main 3 ones I'm considering is like specificity, first of all. So before we even think about kind of tension, volume, like sleep and those sort of aspects, I'm thinking, is what we're doing in the gym actually specific to the goal at hand? I know for myself, when I was training, I thought like getting stronger was what it was important for muscle growth. Like the stronger I am, the bigger I'm going to be. It's like, actually, maybe it's just a kind of an accompaniment of getting bigger is you become stronger. It's not that you have to get stronger to get bigger. It's that when you get bigger, you get stronger. And so it's kind of like it comes with the territory in a sense. And so like training sub 5 reps isn't very specific towards hypertrophy. 5 to like 30 repetitions, which is very wide, but that higher rep range seems to be much more specific towards a hypertrophy outcome. And then you think about even exercise selection. Like when I was first starting, I've like the big 3 was what it was all about. Like go in and get strong at like squat, bench, deadlift. That's not a bad idea at all, but they might be lifts that just don't work well for you at all. But you have to make sure the lifts that you're choosing are specific to the goal at mind. So you don't want to go in and do like a power clean. Like you'll get people doing like power cleans, like Olympic lifts for hypertrophy. And it's just like, man, probably not the best way to put tension towards the muscle. Like you said, mechanical tension there. So those are the things. So what your program just needs to look specific towards hypertrophy. It doesn't want to look like a powerlifting program. It doesn't want to look like a, swimmers program or Olympic lifters program. You got to make sure it looks like bodybuilding specific. And then you have overload and then progressive overload. So overload, it's actually really great for bodybuilding because it's super simple. You just want to work in that rep range and take and work towards a proximity of failure. So you want to be close enough. You just basically want to train hard, like we talked about before. And I think a lot of newbies maybe think they're training hard, but it's like it burns a bit, it feels a bit uncomfortable, and that's when they give up. Whereas actually they're probably just at the threshold of what's hard enough. They're probably around 3 or 4 reps in reserve at that time, which they can grow from. But when you get more intermediate, more advanced, you need to start pushing probably closer to failure, at least some of the time, to be able to grow at your best. So that kind of overload component comes through picking specific movements with specific rep ranges to the goal at hand and training them close enough towards failure or towards momentary muscular failure if it's safe and appropriate to do so. So long as you do that, you kind of met your overload criteria for relative intensity, but then you also have to meet an overload criteria for volume. Like you can't just do nothing in the gym. Like Mike Mentor, like you can't just completely disregard volume. One set for some people, for a lot of people, isn't going to be enough to grow. You need to do enough work. So you need to train hard enough, work enough with those hard sets and meet thresholds for growth. And then progressive overload comes in after that. You can't just stick with those kind of sets and loads that you were doing. You need to eventually make them harder over time because we're adapt. And that's the whole point of overload, is you create stress to cause a response from the body to be able to adapt and grow. So if you stick with 10, like 100 for 10 reps, 3 sets, that might grow you this week, next week, it might grow you in a month's time. But 2 months' time, that's now maybe too far away from failure because it's now easy for you. And so you need to start increasing the load or increasing the number of reps you keep in this proximity to failure. So you stay close enough. So if you keep training hard enough, doing enough volume, you're going to grow because you're forcing an adaptation for the body to respond to. And then I have fatigue management. So that's important for this kind of stress response adaptation as well, where, right, you've stressed the body. Are you going to allow it to adapt and like respond and get better? Or are you going to try and train like chest Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? And so there's never getting any recovery time. So you want to make sure you're kind of training it hard enough and enough total work, but then allowing it to adapt and recover before next time you try and train it, and then continue to do this over weeks. And then after weeks have gone by, another element of fatigue management isn't just rest days, but it's also recognizing maybe you need to take like a bit of time away from the gym. Maybe you need a deload week or a week off to recover from all that accumulated fatigue. So those are like the big 3 ones for training. Specificity, so everything in the gym needs to relate towards the goal at hand. Next is like make sure it's meeting thresholds for growth to overload and progressing that over time, normally for hypertrophy, to keep it very simple, because there's lots of ways you could theoretically progressively overload. But assuming everything's in place, you've got like a static program and you're maintaining good technique, typically it's reps or load, and you continue to do that. And then eventually fatigue management also comes in to make sure that you can actually continue this process, because if you're going to cause kind of fitness improvements in any endeavor, fatigue comes with it, because overload generates fitness and fatigue. So we need to eventually, after a number of weeks, probably remove the accumulated fatigue so we can go again and train hard again. And that's where like going from becoming an intermediate and gaining and progressing as an intermediate comes in, which I mentioned before, where I used to like train hard, train hard, train hard, and I'd adapt, and then I'd regress because I wasn't getting rid of this accumulated fatigue because I just ignored. I didn't know fatigue was a thing. I didn't know deloading was a thing. It's like that next level for me was to make sure I was continuing to advance from intermediate to advanced. It's like that level of fatigue management. Let's wipe away the fatigue so we can go again, because like any adaptation, like even each day we're awake, we accumulate fatigue and we need to sleep to reset for the next. Or Mike always uses the great example of like working. You have your working day and then you have the evening to chill out, and then you can go in for another day. But after a week, you need a weekend off. And then after like a month of, or maybe 6 months of weeks and weeks and weeks, weekends off aren't enough anymore. You need like a week-long holiday. And then you come back and you remove that like working fatigue to go again. I think that analogy works really nicely towards like, again, muscle growth endeavor. And I guess I can talk about some of the nutritional parts of that then.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
so then for sure. So nutrition, I very much, so training for me and those aspects of training that's like number one for hypertrophy. If you haven't gotten that in place, it doesn't matter how good your eating is, how good your sleeping is, how good any other variable is, you aren't striking the match for muscle growth. I think about training as striking the match for muscle growth, and then like your sleep is kind of maintaining that, and your nutrition is like the fuel to the fire so you can keep growing muscle. And so when it comes to nutrition, probably the most important variable, and this is kind of arguable to some extent, is between calories and protein. Like protein is quite literally the building blocks to muscle. I don't think you're going to be growing much muscle without the protein there, but equally, if you're in a huge calorie deficit, it's going to be quite hard to grow muscle. You can grow muscle, but it's going to be incredibly limited.
Yeah.
So they kind of come in first. And for the best muscle growth possible, you want to be in a surplus. That's like having extra raw materials to build an extension to your house. It's just going to make that process far more efficient. It's actually anabolic in its own right to be in a surplus. So that's really good. It's going to increase recovery. It's going to increase the amount of volume you can do. And therefore, it's just going to increase the hypertrophy kind of that you can gain. But equally, you need to make sure you've got sufficient protein there. And for most people, that's going to be about 1 gram per pound of body weight. And then try and spread that protein throughout the day. So typically, it's anywhere from 3 to 6 feedings. Break your protein up equally between those front end and back end your day. You're doing a pretty darn good job, because you need that continual building block to come in so that we can maximize muscle protein synthesis, basically, to keep it basic. But I can't, like, you have to meet certain thresholds like leucine and everything like that. It gets quite complex, but basically have 1 gram per pound, high quality protein, spread that through the day. You're doing your utmost then almost for hypertrophy in terms of protein. You've got your calories, hopefully a surplus. Carbs and fat matter far, far less than those two variables. But you do want to make sure you've got, like I said before, keto probably isn't best, because carbohydrates are quite literally the fuel for our training. We're burning glycogen during our training sessions. That's also what's going to fuel recovery. That's going to lead to probably the best hypertrophic adaptations if you prioritize carbohydrates too, especially around your workout. But in terms of like, they're the main basics. When I think about a surplus for muscle growth, just so people have something in their head,
that's what
I don't really
consider
like, so I don't really consider like 100 calorie surplus, 200, 300. I more so look at, let's weigh ourselves, hopefully each and every day, if not 4 times a week, take an average, and then do that each week and compare back to the week before. How fast are you gaining weight? Then that will give you knowledge of how large your surplus is or not. And then you can use that to dictate, like, should I have more or less? And the way I look at it is, most people probably want to be gaining, and I use every 2 weeks, because I think if you look every week, you can end up making too quick decisions, because muscle growth is super slow. So look, every 2 weeks, you want to be gaining between 0.5% to 1% of additional body weight. So make sure that that's happening. You're probably putting yourself in this like sweet spot for muscle growth, in terms of you're probably putting your best foot forward for as much muscle growth as possible without excessive amounts of fat gain. If you go faster than that rate of gain, you might gain a little bit more muscle, but from way more fat, so it's not worth it. And equally, if you try and gain slower than that, it might be so slow that you don't know if you're gaining or not, because you're trying to measure too small of a percentage change, and you don't really want to be spinning your wheels a month thinking you're in a surplus and be like, I've actually been just at maintenance that whole time, and therefore you haven't grown as much muscle as you could have. So that's kind of what I look at from a nutritional perspective. And really, nutrition is permissive of training. So you have to have that light that matches the fire. And then you have to have the fuel. Well, you don't have to, but next best is having the fuel to keep that fire going, which is the fire being muscle growth.
Simple, right?
Simple, yeah. As I was going through it, I was like, "Oh man, this is books of stuff."
No, it's really. I mean, it's a really good answer. Like, but that just proves how complex and how many factors go into building muscle successfully. And do you know what I mean? And you didn't even touch on things like stimulus to fatigue ratio or anything like that. These are just just the basics. And yeah, I did a post today about the most important thing about muscle growth, and it's I think I put it up there. So training technique comes first, right? And you mentioned most of that, and then the training intensity, and then training structure, and then I didn't even go into the nutritional parts of it. That's just training, and I think everything you mentioned there, you could go into even more and break down each category by 4 or 5 and start explaining about that as well, couldn't you? So yeah,
I was trying not to. I was like, so protein, muscle protein synthesis.
Exactly. Like,
let's not get into leucine.
Yeah, where do you stop? Where do you sort of draw the line? But no, I think you explained it very, very well. And it's a very complex thing. It's very frustrating. It's slow, and it's a case of just trial and error, I think, for a lot of people. And yeah, you mentioned there as well genetics. Now, I was going to be my question near the end, but I thought I'd just touch on it now. So, how much do you think genetics plays on someone's ability to grow a substantial amount of muscle tissue?
So, yeah, genetics are such a fascinating thing. If anyone's super interested in this, The Sports Gene by David Epstein is fantastic, because he just goes into all these different kind of sports and how genetics plays a role in that, and everything from physiology to psychology plays a role. It's more than people realize. It's quite literally like the cards you're dealt with, and then how you play, of course, is like the thing people say, and that's completely true. And most people are average. This is what I always boil it down to, is like, most people are average. That's why average is average. So if you're listening to this, you're probably average. And so like a lot of people, however, think that they have bad genetics. If you asked like 100 people, most of them should say they have average genetics, but I think there'd be probably like, I don't know, 50% that say they're average. Then you get like 40% said they're below average, and then maybe 10% actually have the courage to say they have above average genetics. But that isn't actually what's likely to have occurred in that room. There's probably way more people that are average, and then equal numbers above and below average. And so, yeah, I think it also depends on people's perspectives here. Unfortunately, with the day and age of social media, I mentioned Ronnie Coleman. Like, when I started, I had like ambitions to be huge, and I had so much ignorance to what went into that, and especially to be the size of Ronnie Coleman, who is not just a genetic freak, but like had so many other things potentially going his way. And so with social media, we see basically the creme de la creme. We see the biggest, the best natural enhanced physiques that you're ever going to see. You don't even know if they're photoshopped. You don't know if they're taking performance enhancing drugs.
100%.
So then exactly, that ends up being our frame of reference for what's average. That's what we think is average now. It's like, no, that's like elite. That's like the top of the top. And the average physiques, like anything in life, is just not something that's particularly attractive. I think this is why natural bodybuilding will never be the size of the kind of Mr. Olympias and the enhanced side, because people want to see freaks. They don't want to see like, I don't know, Ford Fiestas. They want to see Ferraris. This is the thing. So yeah, it's just putting it in that perspective. But I guess to say, yeah, genetics play a huge role in everything: physiology, psychology, like even down to like our muscle building potential, but then also down to like how much enjoyment we get from going to the gym and having routine and monotony. How do we deal with diets and like the boring side of that, and all those factors? Obviously environment also plays a key role as well, but it's like they go hand in hand. You can't really pull them apart particularly. I will say, like I said, kind of was alluding to, most people, not most, a lot of people think they're below average, but I don't think that's the case at all. And I think the vast majority of people can grow an incredibly impressive physique that is like something that they probably never thought they would be able to achieve if they just give it enough time and dedication. And really, like, that time element is so important,
Hmm.
because I remember starting and thinking, like, Matt Ogus, as I mentioned before, was like my goal. Incredible physique. He definitely has great genetics, and he would also agree with that. He's got enough sense about him to agree with that. And I got so, like, down that I didn't have his physique after like 5 years. But and almost to the point where I would start questioning, is he on drugs? And I think this is what ends up happening. People are like, anyone who's bigger than me is on drugs, clearly.
Hmm.
But after me going another 5 years, in addition to that, I'm like, huh, like, I don't look as good as him. He's got a crazy aesthetic physique, but my level of muscle mass is not like uncomparable towards what he's got. And so I kind of come down and I look at people who have great physiques. And the vast majority of people have been training a decade plus specifically for bodybuilding. If you haven't done that yet, I don't think you can claim that you have like terrible genetics. Maybe you don't need to do 10 years. That's a long time to keep going to like try and get to that point. But certainly you want 5 years of really nailing it. And I don't think many people can say they've truly, really nailed it consistently for 5 years. Some people, it's weird. I remember speaking to Greg Knuckles and Mike Israetel about it. There seems to be genetics where some people respond to training immediately. So they go into the gym, they grow like a weed, but then they kind of hit this peak and they just plateau and they grow well slow. And then you get other people more of a slow burn, but like almost linearly just continue to improve over time. I definitely wasn't that kind of person who just responded really quickly. I've definitely been more of a slow burn. But you might even realize if you just kept going, you might overtake people who previously you thought were just way better than you. And ultimately, as I talk about all of these things, you can't do anything about it. You've got the genetics you've got the cards that you've been dealt with. So play the best hand you can, and what will be will be. And I also like the idea of, if you keep going at an endeavor longer than the average person, you will be above average. It's just a fact. Like, that's how things happen. So like, if yeah, you just enjoy the process, do the best you can. You'll kind of get what you get, is the philosophy that I like to take about it.
Mm. Definitely. And like, I don't know about you, but a lot of my clients, I feel like I'm constantly trying to lower their expectations in terms of what, you know what I mean? After say 6 months of a building phase, they're upset, or they're pissed off that they're not where they want to be. And I'm like, come on, man! Like, these guys who you see on, like you say, social media, they've been training for 10, 20 years. They're dedicated. They put their lives into this. They're probably on other things as well. Some are, some aren't. Um, and I think, yeah, because of social media, you see these physiques which are possible. And these guys are right. I want to do that. Let's start building muscle. After a few months, no, I'm not really big. I'm not that big yet. What's going on? What am I doing wrong? I'm like, seriously, just keep keep doing what you're doing. Just try and enjoy it. Try and enjoy the whole journey. Like, this is a very, very long term thing. I don't know about you, but I find like I'm trying to, yeah, lower expectations and understand, or try and get my clients to understand that it takes a long time. I had a guy who's 52 years old. He walked in the gym last year when he signed up with me. So he's been training once. He's been training for 1 year. He managed to put on 8 kilos, and then we dieted down. He lost another, I don't know, 5. So he put on 3 kilos altogether. And he was a bit disheartened with his overall results. But I said to him, like, come back in 5 years and sort of, and say that again. It just takes so long and so much sort of dedication and consistency, I suppose, isn't it? I don't think many people realize how hard it actually is to build muscle.
I always think of natural bodybuilding as the epitome of delayed gratification. It's, it's
Yeah.
exactly that. You just have to, once you've been doing it for a long time, like, it's like watching paint dry, how fast results come. I think it's unfortunate because we all, when we start, especially if you're completely uneducated getting into it, you get the newbie gains. You get results despite what you're doing. Like, you don't even have to do things particularly right. And then things really slow down. And if you don't, again, get some of those nutritional principles in place, some of the training principles in place, you could stall out for ages thinking that you're doing everything right. I don't know, following Bob Massive Guy's like workout program and ketogenic diet over here, promised by like some other fitness influencer that it's the thing that's getting him in shape, and like just feel completely lost. And that's where coaches come in, of course. Like 3 kilos for someone in their 50s, like that's no like that's great progress. I take
Really
three
good, yeah.
kilos for sure right now. Like I'd take 3 kilos over 2 years, 3 years even maybe. I'd hope maybe I can gain more, but I mean, realistically, for me, who's been doing this almost 15 years, to gain a kilo of muscle now is going to take like 2, 3, 4 years maybe. Like I actually don't even want to really think about it. And it boils down to what you said there, where you just have to enjoy the process, do your best job, and what will come out of it will come out of it. And it's like, well, the great thing, especially if you do this naturally, because obviously when you take enhancements, there's negative health consequences that just come with that. But even if you maybe didn't gain a kilo of muscle, you still like kept yourself fitter, like all the extra benefits that come with weight training. You have better bone density, like you staved off like gaining weight and becoming unhealthy. You probably had better sleep because of it, better well-being. Maybe that led to being better at work, better with your partner, like you have superior energy levels. So there's still benefits of doing kind of what we do. And yeah, I think the key is understanding, having realistic expectations is important. And like educating your clients about that is also key, but it is hard. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people think they should look like, again, like Ronnie Coleman in a few years or months even, and then they get really disheartened and potentially give up, or they jump onto performance enhancing drugs when that's not necessary. And like there's a lot that should come before they consider those sort of things. They have not got anywhere near a theoretical genetic ceiling at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And going back to genetics, again, I think the whole genetics thing is for some people, I guess I don't want to say excuse, but I guess it can be for a lot of people. But guys sort of blame their genetics for not getting themselves to where they want to be, when really it's just the fact that they're not training as intensely as they should be. Like a hard set going close to failure. And I've seen your videos, like I've seen Mike Israel videos, he's puking up, it's the most uncomfortable feeling you can ever, do you know what I mean? It's not fun at all. And I think as soon as someone gets just into that effective rep stage or phase, they think, okay, I'm done. That's a bit uncomfortable. I'm going to give up now. I'm going to stop. That's close to failure. But really, they had 5, 6, 7, 8 reps left. So I think a lot of it is down to not realizing how hard they need to train to elicit muscle growth. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, if you go into any kind of average gym and you watch the like just the average person training there, they finish a set and they look like they started a set. Is that warming up? Like, what's going on here? Didn't really like you challenge yourself. And I think it's far more likely that they're struggling to see results than someone. And you see this in gyms too, where people are pushing themselves like to hell on exercises. Their technique is terrible. I mean, actually, at the end of the bell curve, they could be seeing lack of results just because they're not actually like they're trying to do a bicep curl. Do you watch them and you're like, that don't look like a bicep curl. That looks like some sort of front raise. Like they're just going too aggressive the other way.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like, the meme is something about like, becoming mature in the gym is finding that sweet spot between like making sure something is hard, but not just hard for the sake of hard, like squatting and bouncing out of the hole and training to failure. And like all these things, like they're hard, but they're not hard for any sake other than hard. We want to make sure it's hard for the muscle that we're trying to train. Because I've definitely been there. Like I've been that person who's blamed their genetics. I've also been that person who has looked at like a big guy in the gym and be like, man, I can use just as much weight as he can for that exercise. But if you looked at me performing it versus him, he had complete control over that movement. I had no control. But I just thought, hey, moving weight A to B is the key to growth. So it's kind of that maturity of realizing, hey, like you said, technique being super important, then the intensity comes in after that. I absolutely agree. But yeah, there's people at either end who just don't quite realize what they're doing and why it isn't working for them.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, cool. So my next question is about like, again, I guess it's sort of going on to training to failure. So how important do you think it is to be tracking your workouts for optimal muscle growth? So let's say we both just trained in the gym. We didn't track our workouts, but our technique was good, like on point. We were taking the working set very close to failure. we were fatiguing the muscle, nutrition, protein, sleep was on point, stress management, SFR, all that kind of stuff. Surely if we stick to those variables, we're still going to get pretty good growth without tracking. I mean, yeah, I guess my question is, how important do you think it is to track every single workout?
I don't think it's that important. I think, like we said, that you see people in gyms who get results. Sorry, that are training either end of the spectrum, like with the like training past failure and doing stupid stuff and not really putting tension on the muscle, and the people who are just not training hard enough at all. You also see people in the gym, and I have some of these guys in my gym who I look at them, I'm like, fuck, this guy, like he never logs book his workout. He never really looks like he's like, I don't know, he's thinking too hard about his training, but he comes in each week and he's freaking jacked and he's just like growing over time. And he might be one of those lucky guys at the end of the genetic spectrum, maybe, who, again, they just have to get some of the basics right and they just grow almost despite what they're doing. They don't have to worry too hard about it. But when you line out those variables like you did, like you're doing everything you need to create a hypertrophic response. Like you're going to grow if you go in and do that. I don't like the idea of doing that personally. I also couldn't coach people like that because it's like, hey, we're not tracking anything. Like, do you feel good? Okay, go harder next week. It's like,
yeah.
And when you get more advanced, and especially when you work with more average people, like there's problems that come along the way. And if you don't track anything, you can't diagnose what's caused what and what might be like off in your program. I also think, unfortunately, as we know, RAR can be hard sometimes to get completely precise, especially in like higher rep ranges, especially for things like legs where it's very uncomfortable and you probably got more in you than you think. And we have good research to indicate that people are pretty accurate with it. But if you never logbook anything, you're putting a little bit more things at risk, especially if you don't train to momentary muscular failure. But even if you go to momentary muscular failure, I think you can hit that without truly hitting it, if that makes sense. You ever see someone just bottle a set where you're like, hey, I thought you had like 5 left and you just ended there? Like,
yeah.
huh? What's going on? And if you don't have logbook data to tell you, no, to appropriately hit like your RAR for this lift to provide a sufficient overload response, you need to hit 500 for 10. But you don't have that data available to you. So you're just like, okay, I'll put 500 on, you hit like 6 reps. Oh yeah, that felt hard. You just convince yourself. And I mean, like you said, training close to failure when you're kind of pretty strong on like leg press, especially, or something like this, it gets super uncomfortable. Even like 3-4 reps in reserve, it's uncomfortable stuff. And if you don't have like this objective logbook telling you like this is what you should be hitting, you can sometimes convince yourself of, again, the body always looks for easy ways out of things. So to answer your question, I do think, yes, you don't need to logbook, but I do think the logbook for some people might become an eventual need to keep progressing, and especially to be progressing at their best. I certainly wouldn't. I logbook all my training. I wouldn't. I couldn't do it any other way. Like I need that data and available to me to feel comfortable and like confident in what I'm doing. I could probably just logbook maybe like some of the compound lifts and like isolation stuff. Wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah.
But I think, especially for muscle groups and for people who struggle to gain consistently over time, it becomes more important. So for me, if I'm ever lax on any logbooking, it's my bicep training. Like I almost am just like, I'm just going to go get a pump, train close to failure. Literally exactly what you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
My biceps are fine, but I just don't care because they are like that elite genetic person because they just respond so easily and I don't have to do much for them. I don't have to worry. They just at the end of the workout do that. But if I applied that same principled approach towards my quads, I wouldn't see the same results at all. I need to take more care over them. And that's where that data becomes really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, you made a very good point about, because like not every session you're going to feel the same, right? You're going to walk in the week after and feel a bit more tired. You're going to be a bit more stressed. So yes, it may feel the same in the gym, but yeah, you may have lost out on 3, 4, 5 effective reps there. So yeah, it is very important. Hands up, I don't log all of my workouts. I do sometimes, but not all of them. Like you say, isolation, I don't. The big compounds, I like to, just because I like to keep an eye on the big movements, but the isolations, no, I don't at all. But yeah. By the way, are you all right for time? I don't want to take the piss.
Yeah, I can do a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. Can we go till 3? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, nice one, Steve. Appreciate it, mate. I've got a few more questions here, but I'll maybe ask one or two more. So I guess going on from that, what's the truth in the closer you train to failure, the less overall volume from sets needs to be done in that week. Is there any sort of truth in that? I guess it
I
would be
think,
because of the mechanical tension, the stimulus placed on the muscle, right?
yeah, there's, I don't know if you had seen it, but Zach Robinson, I had him on my podcast. He recently released a new meta analysis that looked at kind of the relationship between training to failure and muscle growth. Everything up to this point basically had shown that from about 2 RAR to 0 to failure, there really wasn't any extra benefit from training closer to failure, but you got additional fatigue for that. Like
Mm.
neuromuscular fatigue was higher the closer you went to failure. Whereas this new way of looking at that relationship found actually there's exponential increases in growth as you approach failure, which leads to your kind of question of can you do less sets then if you train closer to failure and see just as much growth as people who train further from failure and do more sets? I think actually that someone recently published a paper as well that looked into this. It might have been Jake Remmett from Data Driven Strength,
Mm-hmm.
where he basically, I can't tell people the exact summary of this, but it was essentially that kind of one group doing fewer sets closer to failure, another group doing more sets further from failure. And they saw like equivocal growth basically.
Right.
So yeah, it's a very interesting question.
Mm.
I don't know if like you could go into those people in each group and be like, could you have done more? That would be interesting to me. Is like, what if one group could have done like the group that left even more reps in reserve, if they generated less fatigue, could they have done even more volume than they
Mm.
were? And could the other group have done even more? Like maybe they could have, I don't know. And is failure something that you can get accustomed to and adapt to so it doesn't feel as fatiguing as it maybe did initially? I'm also not sure about that. So I think we can be pretty sure that, yeah, you've got to be working hard and you've got to do enough volume. And maybe if you train further from failure, then you probably need to do more of the volume side. And if you train closer to failure, not only can't you do as much volume, but you probably don't even need to. And there might be many roads to Rome. We don't have a perfect answer on that.
Mm.
So that's kind of where I'm left with this question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, fair enough. And I guess you could sort of switch it around. You could turn a few dials here and there depending on your session, depending on how you feel on that day, right? But yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense.
because it's a challenging one too, because this, when people look at this, it's often looked at in a vacuum. Maybe like if you're doing a single week of training, but what if you stretch that out to a mesocycle? Does that then look
Mm.
different? Is there a different SFR, stimulus to fatigue ratio, post deload versus in your final week of training? Because when I think about it, after my deload, I don't want to train to failure immediately, because unless I do like, even if I do one set on things, I'm probably going to get really sore because my body is not used to training that close to failure. So I start a bit further from failure and you can get some really good results and you adapt to that. And then each week get closer and closer to failure. And then by the week you're about to deload, to get like the stress response, maybe at that point that you've adapted to, you need to train to maybe all out or close to failure. And then you're deloading next week anyway. So if there's a big wave of fatigue, it's not so bad. But yeah, that's where I think a longer term perspective you can think about this question a bit more than
Mm-hmm.
just in that single, like, okay, like I either train to failure with less sets or do more sets and further from failure. I think both of those is like, well, you might end up doing too much or too little at various times within a longer time course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, interesting stuff. In terms of um, mesocycles, how long do you think, or how often do you change your mesocycle? Let's say, I don't know, clients or yourself. If you're getting good results, if you're always progressing, if you're enjoying it, if you're not getting bored, do you feel the need to change? Would you change, or just carry on until you want to change?
So yeah, the way I set it up would always be in a way that's like set up well. So what am I trying to say? So a typical saying I don't like, because the saying that immediately comes to mind, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a fine thing to apply to some things, but not other things. So if you've already set something up to quote unquote be as optimal as possible and it's going super duper well, then it ain't broke, don't fix it, to me is a great thing. But if you're doing something that is not set up very well and it could be going so much better if you just made this one switch,
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
if it ain't broke, don't fix it is like, hey, it's almost broken. Like you better
Because
probably
it's not
make
working.
this
Yeah.
amendment to, or it could be working, but just not very
Right.
well. Like
Right. Yeah.
uh we used to cutting the more like sorry, cutting your lawn with scissors is like works, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
way
yeah,
more efficient to use like the most up to date lawnmower that, like, I don't know, maybe it can even do it on its own and you can
yeah.
just sit back and relax.
Mm,
So it's similar here. So if you've already set everything up with the principles in place, and it's like I'm choosing good SFR movements, like you said, all of that's in place and things are just going really well, you feel great and you're seeing good results. I wouldn't change something just for the sake of changing it. But if again, someone, don't know, they're doing a program that has power cleans in it and they've just heard here that they're like, maybe power cleans aren't the most specific movement to hypertrophy, but I'm seeing results because the rest of their program set up well.
yeah,
Maybe they want to change the power clean still because they could get even better results from doing something more specific towards the muscles they're trying to grow.
yeah.
So yeah, I think most people, I think that question came from a perspective of the program set up well. If things are going well, do we need to make a change? And I would say no. You want to ride out things for as long as you can until like a change is really warranted. Don't just manipulate stuff for the sake of it, because that can actually lead to problems as well. Where
Yeah.
I've done that before, where every mesocycle, which every like 6 weeks or so, I change movements. I'm just relearning stuff. I'm like, oh yeah,
Mm,
I'm progressively overloading. I'm seeing PRs every week. It's like, yeah, but you're just relearning like a new movement each 6 weeks. Like keep it in and keep
mm,
progressing it as until it becomes like the SFR drops off, it becomes stale, it just doesn't feel good. If you've had it for like 4 months and you're just psychologically worn out by it, you've done it for 4 months. You're probably fine to rotate it at that point as someone who's maybe intermediate advanced.
yeah, definitely. And you could also keep in the main big movements and then sort of change around the smaller isolation movements every few weeks as well, just to keep it fresh, right?
Yeah, that's a great addition to this, is because like I said, that like the skill component, the neuromuscular component of learning a technique and therefore hitting PRs every week and kind of fooling yourself doesn't really apply to a bicep curl
Mm.
or a lateral raise. It's kind of like
Yeah, yeah.
how much learning is really going on with that movement. So isolation based movements, I'm way more happy for people to rotate those again more readily. So yeah, if even like I say, mesocycle to mesocycle, even if like 1 week, just to know a certain bicep curl wasn't feeling that great, I'd be like, it's not a big deal, rotate it. Like, but if it's a core lift and you've only been doing it a short time, maybe you want to just see that through a little bit longer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Awesome. So, last question about supplements. Obviously, apart from creatine and caffeine, which I think are the two most well researched supplements out there, what supplements do you take, or what supplements do you suggest your clients take other than those two?
Sure. So yeah, it's the question I think gets way too much press,
Mm.
but you have to talk about it at some point.
Someone asked me to ask
And
you, so
actually,
you know.
yeah, of course. So yeah, for like the ergogenic benefits, sports performance, creatine and caffeine is the only ones that I actually like will say they're wise things to take, because there's
Mm,
a lot of evidence behind them. Outside of that, I'm really at like a push to be like, yeah, you should definitely be taking X, Y, and Z. There's some promising things like citrulline malate has some promising benefits, but it's nothing I would hang my hat on.
minimal,
There's
yeah.
like, yeah, we haven't got enough evidence to really be suggesting that's an absolute must by any means. Like something like betaine has some positive like benefits as well, it seems, but again, it's nothing that's crazy. It's just like maybe if you're like you have like a lot of discretionary income and or disposable income even, you can put it towards that if you're super into bodybuilding or whatever, and you can do that. That's fun. A lot of like pump formulas tend to have these sort of products in that can be nice. Again, I just suggest that because people train late, they don't want caffeine but they want something. It's like maybe a pump formula can be something fun to like try in those instances. But outside those two, most of the other ones I recommend are just like health supplements. So it's like your vitamin D, your omega 3s, maybe a well dosed multivitamin, or take magnesium and zinc separately if you're not getting a multivitamin in there. And outside of those, it's nothing. Like creatine and
Mm,
caffeine is literally the only ones. I used to, a long time ago, recommend beta alanine, but for bodybuilding, for hypertrophy, I have there's not been any studies to show, I don't think, that there's like a positive effect there. And when you look at the mechanistic like reason for taking it, it doesn't really make sense that it's kind of buffering some of the waste products that maybe even have a hypertrophic benefit. So that's why I don't even kind of promote that one, which otherwise would be an evidence-based like supplement to take if you are maybe a crossfitter or you're doing more endurance-based sports.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's worth noting that without the basics like sleep and stress management and the right sort of training, nutrition, these supplements, there's there's just no point really. You need to nail the basics first, and then think about taking creatine and caffeine and maybe the other things right at the end, to even benefit your
Yeah.
training.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Cool. Nice one, Steve. Well, yeah, I mean, it's gone a lot longer than I thought, so I appreciate your time. I had more questions, but we've ran out of time. Where can people find you, your Instagram?
For sure. Yeah, I think those questions, like we said, they could have even gone longer answers
Yeah,
and delved into
yeah,
questions even more.
yeah. But I think
So
I think you sort of went into great detail about most of the questions I had. So yeah, I appreciate it.
cool. Good. Yeah, no, I appreciate being on. And yeah, if people want to learn more about Revive Stronger, our coaching, they can find our podcast. They can head to revivestronger.com. If they want to find me or kind of interact with me and see what I'm up to on a more daily basis, Revive Stronger at Instagram is where I'm at. And then that's pretty much it. Again, if you just want to search for the podcast on podcast providers, the Revive Stronger podcast is where we're at. Or if you want to hear to mine and Pascal's like general chit chat and banter and discussions, which are somewhat fitness related, but sometimes go a bit off off base, they can
Off
search the
topic, yeah.
improvement season for those. Yeah, they go pretty
Nice.
off topic.
That's all good. It's all good. Nice one. Cool. Yeah, I liked your podcast with Coach Kasim the other week. That was really interesting. It's one of the questions I was going to ask, but again, it's very, very complex topic. So maybe next time, mate.
Too much. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Nice one, Steve. I appreciate it, mate. And yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
Absolutely.